I don't know. One thing that came up for me that I think they both kind of remind me of, and I don't know how this is gonna sound out loud, but it's like you're special and you're not. And that's like
Yeah.
okay. Hey everybody, welcome back to our podcast as above.
So below, I'm Silver, your co-host. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm a Pisces rising.
And I'm Toni. I'm your other co-host. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm also a Pisces rising. We are back to continue our series on the astrological axes. It's been a little while. I think, we're what are we? Podcast newbies, I guess.
Yeah,
Um, so we're still trying to get the hang of everything. Like, it's a lot of work to do a podcast and have full human lives.
it
So
is. It is.
So yeah, we were gone for a little bit, but we're back and we're excited to continue the series and finally get to Leo and Aquarius's. I'm sure they were like literally at the edge of their seats waiting for us to get to them.
I'm sure the second the podcast dropped, all the Leos went to look for their episode.
Yeah,
Here,
so
guys.
this is really all we're
Welcome.
waiting for. Finally.
So right now it is 4:40 p.m. on Friday. Um, Let me get
11:11.
into a bit of the transits. What's going on? What's going on in the sky? I know we are in Scorpio season, so the sun is in Scorpio. This has been a long week with the lunar eclipse for me anyway. Um, I don't know if Toni agrees.
I mean, definitely along, I don't know, what is time? I feel like I did this last time. Um,
What is time?
my concept of time just sometimes it feels very um fleeting. So yes, it's been a long week, but like also what is a week? Like I'm just like it's been a long life. I just feel like I've been here so long.
The moon is in Gemini today. We record often on like Gemini moon.
I know we have for our Gemini Sag or one of those episodes, maybe it was Aries Libra. One of those episodes we did record on a Gemini moon. So
I remember like pointing that out. Mercury is in Scorpio as well. Venus is in Scorpio. Mars is in Gemini. Uh, Jupiter's in Pisces. Saturn is in Aquarius. This is like really scary if like a baby was born today. Like Scorpio, Gemini. That's all I see.
Yes, Mars is retrograde right now. And everybody all like knows about Mercury retrograde, da, 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 da. I feel like Mars retrograde, people don't, there's not quite as much like it hasn't really spread that much out of astro communities, but I definitely think it would be interesting to talk about our experiences of that if we're having any.
What, like a lack of motivation?
It could be that.
I don't know. What have I experienced so far? I don't know. Everyone's like, Sagittarius, just keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything for the next 6 months. Like don't get into any like fights or arguments because it's not worth it. Like all this, like just like I don't know. It was like especially after like Nikki was being all messy, but that was like the beginning of it mostly.
Mm.
Let's dive into the building blocks of Leo and Aquarius, and where these signs fall in our chart.
So, Leo, I have that falls in my sixth house. I don't have any like planets there, but I do have this thing called the lot of spirit there. And to keep it brief, so it's a placement that's calculated using different planets in your chart as well as different angles in your chart. I'm not sure, I can't remember off the top of my head which angles and planets, but it has to do with like your will and like the way that you go about like getting your purpose or fulfilling your purpose, like what you do in the world, kind of. It's like people astrologers will say to look at it for like career related stuff a lot. So well, yeah, that's where I have Leo. And then Aquarius is in my 12th house, and I have Neptune and Uranus there. And that's it.
Okay, yeah. I mean, Toni and I are both Pisces rising, so it's actually the same for me. I have a Leo sixth house, with my North Node in Leo, and then I have Neptune and Uranus in Aquarius in my 12th house, and also my South Node. So,
Okay, so as always, we're going to share our visuals and talk about the different things that make up Leo and Aquarius. So starting off with Leo, the little symbol underneath of Leo that looks kind of like a, I don't know, I always felt like it looked like a little doll with a ponytail.
I always imagined it as like a lion, but now I'm
Yeah,
like, how is that a lion?
I think I don't know how it's a lion, but I do feel like I understand how it's a
Yeah,
lion. I can't really describe how it's a lion, but I
it's
know.
like the mane or something.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so that's the glyph. Leo is a fire sign. Its modality is fixed. It is ruled by the sun, and Saturn has its detriment here, and it is diurnal.
So now we have Aquarius. Under it is the glyph, which look like two little waves. I like honestly think it looks like water.
Mhm.
Um, and the water bearer makes sense. It's an air sign along with Gemini and Libra, which we have talked about already. It is also a fixed sign. It is ruled by Saturn, and the sun is in detriment in Aquarius, and it is also a diurnal sign.
Yeah, so that's Leo and Aquarius. And so now that we've kind of listed out all of the different things that make up both of those signs, we're going to talk more in depth about what those building blocks mean to us. So starting off with Leo, um, it is a fire sign. And so at this point, we've talked about this twice on our episodes, but I still think, especially because it's been a little bit of a while since we've talked about fire, we got to bring back up those fire words and get the fire going.
All right. So some fiery words. When I think of fire, I think of like power. I think of destruction. On the darker note, I think of passion. I think of like its captivating nature of its ability to, um, draw people in, like visually and also like physically, I guess.
I had some of the same words like eye-catching. I thought about like how active it is. I think I wrote like
Mhm.
kinetic at one point because it's just like always
Yeah.
moving. Um, I wrote that it burns. And with that, I thought about how, something burning can obviously mean like ouch, hurting, like bad, but also it could mean like passion or like, when someone's love burns for you, it's like that's some real
Mhm.
passionate shit right there. Um,
And like
and
a
I also thought
yearning. Mhm.
exactly. And then I also thought about burning out, which is like, we all know what that is.
The end of the
It's
flame.
the removal of the light. It's what happens when it goes dark.
Mhm.
And I put creativity, which I don't know if we talked too much about in
Yeah.
our previous ones, but I definitely think that's relevant for Leo. I have inspiring, and I think this was because I had heard another astrologer talk about inspiration as like they like broke it down as inspiration and like thinking about the root word of spirit within inspire. And so I looked up like sort of like definitions of inspire, and one that I found was like to breathe or put life or spirit into the human body, impart reason to a human soul. I felt like that definition kind of made sense for me for why I associate inspiration with fire because even when you think about like the way fire is used in phrases, it's like she has a fire in her eyes. It's like there's like a
Mhm.
level of aliveness, there's a level of like
Of, like
presence,
passion,
and
and
yeah, like
I think that people are inspired by passion, like that in itself is like it's not always like the work itself, but like when you see work and you can see the passion that the artist had when they made the work, that's like that
Right.
counts. Yeah.
Especially when you say imparting reason to a human soul, like it's one thing for you to, be alive and like to just be incarnated, but it's another thing to feel like there's a reason for being here and to like pursue that reason. And like the lust for life that I think fire signs can have is really, I think, inspiring. And that's what makes me kind of associate that with like being just having a spirit, like being like willful.
Beautiful. I like that. Adding on the layer of the fixed sign. So this is fixed fire. So this is a controlled fire.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's how I view it anyway. When I think of a fixed fire, I think of like a candle or like a lantern or like things that are not like out of your control, of course. So like a regular like a house fire in comparison to like a bonfire, something that's kind of more contained and sustainable, um, is what I think about, I guess. What does fixed fire add to you?
I just thought about fixed in general. And then over like gradually the words get more and more related to fire. But I thought about fixed energy as concentrated, as like focused, centered, I think was really important. I think centeredness is really important for Leo, and I'll continue to come back to that. I thought about like tunnel vision. I think all fixed signs can get very tunnel vision about um, whatever's important to them or whatever they deem like necessary for survival. I wrote like staying the course. Um, and then I thought about what controlled fire allowed for like human evolution. So like when Neanderthals discovered fire, there was like probably a level of fear and a feeling of like, all these things. Like it's eye-catching, but like it's scary, but like you're like, what does it have to offer?
Like they probably tried to touch it and they were like, ah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is so wild now because it's like, why would you try to touch fire? But I think it's like because we've been programmed to like obviously know the dangers of it. So when humans discovered how to control fire, that really stepped up the game. And so when I was reading about like what did the controlled use of fire allow, one thing that came up was REM sleep. So like literally our dreams, like the ability to dream, because before the controlled use of fire, um, humans were very like vulnerable to predators and like they couldn't like get a
Get
lot of sleep.
rest.
Yeah, like they literally had to be like ready at any point. But fire was like a way that they could keep away predators because like they're not going to come near the fire.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of what allowed humans kind of to develop a circadian sort of rhythm, I guess, or like the sleep cycle where it's like at night you sleep, for
Like a
more than like 7 hours.
stable cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And thus you can get into REM sleep and thus you can dream, which I think is kind of beautiful for thinking about
Thus you can
Leo and
dream.
dreaming. And I mean, dreaming is associated with some other signs too, but
But it's
in
very
terms of like,
Leo-y.
yeah,
Mhm.
like just aspirations and that kind of stuff. Um, it also allowed
Like
for like,
imagination and
right, exactly. Another thing controlled use of fire allowed for was like more reflection. It's a way in which you can kind of turn off your survival instincts, right, a little bit, because you have warmth, you have something that you can protect yourself from like predators. And so it's like, what can you do now? And it literally was talking about like people sitting around the fire, telling stories, like looking into the fire, like coming having visions and that kind of stuff. Like it just kind of like when it comes to how much fire helped to like elevate the human mind, I think that's really interesting when thinking about just the element of fire and its associations with like this sort of higher consciousness. Like there's a consciousness with fire that's not quite as like it's like distinct from the other elements, I think.
yeah, I know, like even like hearing you say that, I feel like whenever I've been like around a fire or like in like in a space where the fire was safe, like it's really easy to like kind of like get like hypnotized by the fire
Mhm.
in a similar way that I feel with the ocean, like in a way where like I'll just start like kind of just like introspecting or thinking or like just like releasing things or like, like which is so interesting because I've never thought of fire bringing that like meditative state to me as much as I think
Mhm.
about water, but
Mhm.
like it definitely has in the past. I definitely have had moments where I've been like
Yeah.
renewed by a fire.
Yeah. And I feel like it's interesting to kind of think about the comparisons of like how I personally feel with fire versus water, because I feel like it's a kind of a similar sort of ritual of like feeling entranced by it a little bit, but then also like the feelings that arise from a fire to me are like much more like active. I think it's also interesting to think about like different like native traditions where like literally fire is like you worship fire. Like fire is like it was kind of put on this sort of pedestal of being very like spiritual
Yeah.
in a similar way to water, but I think that I don't with fire I think about worship too. Like within Christianity specifically, like there's like this idea of fearing God, which, I struggle with. I feel like it's a little I don't know how much I agree with how it's used, but anyways, that's like a thing, right? And fire, I feel like has a similar thing of like you have to be a little bit afraid of fire. You can't like because it will burn us alive. We can't get too comfortable with fire. Like there's only a level of closeness that you can really have with it. But I think that also makes it like kind of badassy, like and like you have to respect it because it's just like it's this thing that kind of incites this feeling of like I'm a little bit afraid, but like also I kind of want to listen to you and like follow
Yeah.
you and like do what you say, but I'm scared.
Yeah, in like a God-fearing way, like in a like a
Yes,
worshiping way,
exactly.
like you said. Like that's so true. I like that. Also everything that we're talking about regarding like fire and like all of this is really making me think of like the Red Queen in Game of Thrones and how she literally was
Mm.
her relationship with fire, how she used it to like get things and like the way that she would literally like talk to the fire.
The fire symbolism throughout House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, I feel like is really interesting. I feel like I want to go back and watch Game of Thrones from the
Yeah.
perspective of like astrology a little bit, just thinking about the elements in general. Because like
Yeah.
in House of the Dragon, they talk about like the Valyrians come from the sea, whereas like the Targaryens come like they're the fire group.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just like different quotes throughout the episodes that I think speak interestingly to how fire is like just this it's like fearful but it's so powerful and like it's like that tension that it incites makes it kind of like wow like it's just you just can't help but be inspired by it.
It's naturally magnetic, but it's also literally like can be harmful and destructive. It's like passion,
Mhm.
like if you have too much, it could be dangerous, destructive. But like if you don't, like, I mean, but if you like are in need of it, it can be like inspiring and motivating. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
um, so let's bring in the layer of like the sun. So we now have fixed fire and then ruled by the sun. I think the sun representing, like our kind of like inner purpose, our reason for being here, essentially, but also our ego, right? So
Mm.
like there's like, different ways that it is perceived on like the spiritual side of things. It's one's like will and sense of vitality. It's the giver of life and it's also our like conscious mind. Um I like was reading about it and it said like that our sun sign is the adult that centers our inner child, which is the moon.
Mm. Yeah, I had largest body in our solar system. And I don't know, I mean, I know the sun is big, like obviously for it to have so much light, it would have to be a big ass thing. But when I was looking at like the size of it in comparison to like the planets, it's kind of wild. Like it literally like it makes like these huge planets look even smaller. And it's like it's already hard enough as humans to imagine the size of a planet at all. But then when you think that the sun being 11 times bigger than Jupiter, which is like the biggest planet, it's like again, these are unimaginable figures that we're talking about. Like we could not, I don't even think I could look at something that big up close, like you just wouldn't even see. You know what I'm saying? Like,
It's literally no, yeah, you definitely wouldn't be able to. You would be blinded. But it's also
yeah.
literally like it's like the source of energy and light in our universe. Like that sounds in itself so spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like a god. Like, like
Yeah. When I think about like the beauty of nature, but then also just like the magnitude of like the planets and like the sun and the moon, I'm like, hell yes, you would worship that. Like what? Like what else would you do?
literally.
So I just feel like they're so related, like the sun and fire, but like especially like the sun and the planets and stuff, like they just have this like inherent relationship to like spirituality and like enlightenment.
Yeah. And I feel like even enlightenment, even thinking about like the physical things that the sun does for us, like here, it literally like illuminates the world. It literally makes it so that we like have sight. Like if we didn't have
Mhm.
the sun, what the fuck? Like we would literally have nothing. Um, no, because like even thinking about that, would we even have thought about fire if we didn't have like I don't know, was the sun like a source of inspiration for what we could do with
Mm,
fire, considering
yeah.
it gave us light to begin with?
Oh, good point.
And also thinking about like how it literally like illuminates shadows and like all this stuff, like anything hidden,
It's
and like
about knowing. It's about like how much more can you know because of the sun?
exactly.
Like it literally
Yeah. Like when I think about that, and then I like, thinking of like a fixed fire sign ruled by the sun being Leo, like I think of like, wow, like the power you would possess. Of course, they have this like God complex, king complex. I think king complex is better. Um, like I feel like how could you not? Like you're ruled by the sun. You are the center. Like
yeah, like I just feel like, especially with a sign like Leo being ruled by the sun and being a fire sign, there's just like a way in which like a centeredness of awareness, of purpose, of like vision that I think I definitely can see in Leos, where it's just like
yeah.
it's just clarity, like it's just clear, like and it's like if you like imagine one day just waking up and feeling like your purpose and your reason for being here is clear to you.
Like how unstoppable you would be.
Like that's
Like
literally half
literally,
the that's like so much of the barrier of the human experience is not having clarity around who you fucking are, but boom, like you wake up
exactly.
and you just know who you are. Like,
And that's why I feel like Leo sun signs, like they're like literally for that to be like our life purpose, like our sense of like living, and for them to be literally ruled by this planet. Like of course they're the way that they are. Of course they're natural leaders. They're just so like certain of themselves in a
mhm.
way. That is so inspiring. Like what? Of
It's like
course
the
you have
sun.
that
Like, and
clarity.
if you think about the sun, like that's a certain object. Like it is an object that like no like first of all, it gravitationally pulls the planets that orbit, right? So it's like it's keeping everybody else together by being in that center of the solar system. It's literally
Right.
helping everything to like without the sun, the solar system would just fall apart. Um
Right.
and planets would like run into each other. It would just be bad.
Yeah.
So they're literally keeping shit together. And I thought about it as like a one astrologer, I don't remember who or where I read this, but someone described it as the central organizing principle of a person. So, like in terms of astrology, your sun is like, if you think of it as the central organizing principle, it's like you might do other things like via these other planets. They might, have more to do with maybe your emotions or your, aggression or your assertion, whatever. But it's all being filtered through that central organizing purpose. It's that which around everything else in your life is functioning. So it's like wherever your sun is, that's gonna be what it always kind of comes down to for you. Or like that's just
Yeah.
like that's gonna be
Like that's
the
what you're
main
really
thing
here
that
for.
yeah, exactly. Like that's the main thing that's organizing everything else. in her book, You Were Born for This, Chani Nicholas describes the sun as the intention of the soul and the content of the life's purpose. And then I think Demetra George and Astrology and the Authentic Self describes it as like basic identity, will, conscious, purpose. So all of these like descriptions I think are getting to that whole, I don't know, purpose is the easiest way that I can kind of remember it, or like just like the awareness of why you are here, the awareness of how to carry out that which you were born for. Which is like wild because like how do you freaking know what you're born for? But like
But Leo's do.
yeah, Leos do. And I think all of us do at some point. There's just a lot of ways in which the world and society and everything kind of gets you to forget or like gets you to doubt it or
Yeah.
distorts it, or there's a lot of barriers I think to connecting to one's purpose, especially because it's like we have, whenever you hear the word purpose, it's like there's like, oh, we relate it to job automatically, we relate it to like a source of wealth or source of income automatically, we relate it to like just things that are shaped by the society that we live in. But it's like, imagine a world that was not shaped by capitalism. Like, what would you be here to do if there was no way, if your
Yeah.
survival didn't depend on it,
Exactly.
like, what would you do? The thing that makes it unique for Leos is like there is a knowing of your like uniqueness and your specialness and like your connection that maybe it's not articulated through those kinds of terms, but they know.
They
And
know that they're like that they are a blessing and that they were
right,
created in
exactly.
God's like what's that expression? Created in God's
Image.
image. Yeah. Um, and like I
Exactly.
feel like people are often like put off by that or threatened by that or like annoyed by that, but I think that's honestly like a really beautiful thing because it's so hard to like be around this world and not forget that you are,
Exactly.
you know?
Yeah, and I think that's why I think the knowing part is so important because it's like it's not that it doesn't exist in the other signs. It's just that the other signs don't know quite as well.
Yeah.
Like so that's where I think sometimes Leos, when they can really like help gas you up, it's like because they're like, I know it's in me, so I know it's in you. So
Exactly.
like bring that energy to the
Yeah.
present. Like
And then
let it out.
literally on the flip side of that, I think that because Leo is like the kind of like the sun embodied, like, you know, like in terms of being ruled by the sun, I feel like it also like can illuminate those like insecurities in people or like the things that like there is their shadow. Like I said, like the sun illuminates like the shadows like on this realm, but like for Leos, it's like they can illuminate your shadow or like they can just them being because they're so certain of themselves can really like bring out insecurities or things that like you try to hide or like your shadow side in general. And I think that, or things that you know you feel shame about or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And I think that that's like their natural like light and their natural way of being that exudes like pride and like all this stuff is like threatening to like people. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like whenever I think of anyone that like says that they don't like Leos, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Like, what do you have to hide? What are you not facing?
Like, what are you afraid of? Like, of yourself almost. Like,
Exactly.
and like the what are you, and like also like I think there's a lot of shame around taking up space. And I feel
Exactly. And
like
Leos do it.
so right, exactly. So I think that that's where the insecurity comes from, or like the just not knowing how to respond. I think it's because of shame and like feeling
Exactly.
like you don't deserve to be, because you don't feel like you deserve to be at the center of your own life. You don't understand why another person should be at the center of their own life. When really, what
Exactly.
other place can you be except for at the center of your own life, right? And
It's
Leos
your life.
realize that.
Exactly.
Before we move on from the sun, I just want to say also, I thought about like, what can people do with the light, right? So the light of the sun and with their light. And I think that's a key. Like, if you just ponder on that question, you'll come up with what the sun means for you. Because, like, for example, I thought about what can you do with the light, right? You can see. What can you do with your light? Like, if you think of yourself as light, like you can allow it to shine, you can um guide people, you can have will, you can experience things. And if you think about your light as your life source, right? Like, how do you use your life source to shape your reality? How do you use your life source to shape your experience, to allow what you have to offer to the world to be impacted and for the world to like feel it, kind of. And like that's what the sun is doing. Like it's like blessing the entire world with its like energy. I mean, depending on how close you are to it. But um it's like it's an offering. And so if you think about the sun as an offering,
so beautiful.
your sun, you are an offering. What is your offering? Um, so yeah. Now let's move into Aquarius, the polarity. And it's an air sign. So Silver, what does air mean to you?
I feel like I always start us off with this one. Air. um, for me, air is very representative of intellect. We've said this many, many times, like how air is everywhere, nowhere, all at once. I think of perception. I think of like factual and less emotional. It's very like up here. It's like the mind, it's the like thoughts, like yeah, those are words that come to mind.
Yeah, I think of like mental connection. I think of like stimulation, like just like when your mind is like moving, I feel like air, it's hard because like this is fixed air that we're talking about with Aquarius, but in general, I feel like I always think of air as not really stable. Like I feel like it's always moving a little bit. Like I
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to imagine because we don't know what it looks like, but I just feel like the stimulation kind of reminds me similar to fire, like this idea of just like in motion. I had observant, and I think you kind of mentioned this with like it's being everywhere and nowhere all at once. I feel like when you have that capability, you can observe a lot that's going on in the room that you're in. I literally think of
Right.
them like as like a fly on the wall in some ways, although I feel like air signs, I don't think any of the air signs are the type that's like not going to communicate and connect to people
Right.
in a space, right? But I feel like they do that also from a place of being able to observe really well. Like they're not just doing it, like they're not when you're talking with an air sign, like they're there with you and like you can feel kind of present in the conversation, but they're always everywhere too. Like they're kind of like I feel like they always have a just like a way of observing everything that's happening that is like by kind of fitting in and going in the crowd and being
Definitely.
among the people, but they're like seeing it all.
Words that stood out to me among the people, connection. And like I don't know, like I didn't say this, but like there's like a social level to the air signs in general. Like they're definitely like connective and like humanitarian to some extent. Like just like as in, well, that's more Aquarius specifically, but like just like geared towards people, like
Mhm.
towards like everyone. I don't
Mhm.
know what a good word for that would be, but
Yeah. I also thought about like the invisibility cloak. I think is that in Harry Potter?
yeah, I
There's
think
like
so. I've never watched Harry Potter, but that's like where that's from.
okay, yeah, I didn't know if that's where it like originated, but like what you can do with the invisibility cloak, like there's so much you can bear witness to. There's so much knowledge you can gain. You can kind of hear so many different perspectives and like I just feel like there's so much
Mm-hmm.
knowing by being invisible. And I think air is like an
Yeah,
invisible kind of sign that's like everywhere but nowhere.
yeah.
And I also thought about the human condition. And I felt like that was really important for me just because, you know, people know what a human experience is, right? But when I learned about the human condition, one, I didn't learn about that more so until like high school. And it's more about the concept of being human. It's not so
Mm-hmm.
much about the lived experience of being human. It's not necessarily about like going out and feeling the sun on your face and feeling it's about the like the analytical sort of removed sort of like perspective of like, what does it mean to be human conceptually? And
Mhm.
that to me is such a like air thing, but Aquarius thing as well, of just like thinking about things as concepts.
That's very like air side. Also, like I feel like if we were to assign superpowers to the signs, they would definitely be invisible. That would be their superpower.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I had for air. For fixed air, oh my gosh, I was thinking about this and I literally wrote down it's the hardest to imagine because we can't really see air. So it's like, what the fuck is fixed
Yeah.
air? Like,
I would imagine like a draft, like or like like a strong wind that like is like very like it has a direction already. So like a strong like gust of wind. I
mm,
don't know. Mhm.
I think of like still air for some reason. Like I think about like fog, even though fog moves around, I feel like it's like it doesn't move as like one fog is the only time that I feel like you can actually see air because you can see the dimming of the light. Like I feel like fog is a particular type of air that feels like stuck in some way. Um, but like it's still moving, but it kind of moves, it doesn't move as like seamless as like other air to me.
Yeah,
Um,
I know. Fog is good. Or like a cloud. Like that. I
mm,
mean, fog and clouds are like the same, right? But that idea. So you
yeah.
think that they're okay, so when you think fixed, do you think like stagnant?
No, this was just how I was visualizing it.
Okay.
So, but I do think that that's a good question because that's something I was thinking about. Um, Oh, one thing I wanted to mention is that fixed air itself feels like a concept. Like it feels like it's not real. Like it's just something you have to conceptualize. You can't even
Yeah,
like you can't
literally.
like be like point to it and be like that's fixed air. You have to be like this is what fixed air would look like, you know? And to me that's so Aquarius already.
Yeah.
Um I said what does it mean to be mentally or socially fixed? Because I feel like I was saying mental and social being like the airy words, but what does it mean to be fixed in that nature? And I said, is it closed-minded to that which is unfamiliar? But I felt like that was not, like, I don't find that to be true. What I actually came to was that I think fixed air, in terms of how it's expressed as like Aquarius, I think it's about discernment. I think it's about trusting knowledge and objectivity. It's like
Yes.
it's not necessarily not letting different things in, but they have to be rooted in an objective sort of search or pursuit of knowledge to just
Yeah.
so like if it's not rooted in that, then that's not something that they're going to let come into their like knowledge zone. So it's like
Exactly.
it is kind of fixed in the sense that you can't just let any old thing tell you how to think. You can't just let any old thing tell you like what is true or what is like factual. Like
Yeah, that's what yeah.
you have to use your discernment. And I think that's how Aquarius kind of goes about it.
I think Aquarius only take into account what they know to be true. Like humans' emotions, for example, are like things that are not like necessarily that cannot be seen objectively, won't like be able to penetrate the
Mm-hmm.
bubble that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I like
Yeah.
wrote that down. I said only care about what's factual, what they know to be true.
Right. It's like about objectivity. And I think it's like you can tell, like, if you want to prove something to them, then you have to prove it objectively and in a way that is logically rooted. You cannot
Yeah,
prove something to them through emotions.
exactly.
That's not true. Like, you have to, it's weird because it's like you kind of have to ground it, but it's not necessarily grounded in material things, but in a logical, conceptual, like, line of thinking. What is your line of thinking?
Yeah,
If you don't have an A to Z, like you don't have any way of getting through to them.
exactly.
So that's like a little bit of fixed air. Aquarius
Um,
is also ruled by Saturn. And we talked about Saturn a lot in the last episode, but of course, Saturn wants us to talk about Saturn some more. Um, so what kind of, I know we literally like just talked about it, but what kind of words do you feel like you associated with Saturn and specifically, thinking about Saturn in Aquarius versus Saturn in Capricorn? Because that made it a little bit more interesting
you're
for me.
right. Yeah, I think that I was like learning about like the mythology behind Saturn and how he was like literally the father of time, like the god of time, and how he like ate his children to prevent from being overthrown.
Mm-hmm.
Um and how like I like was reading about what like his what society was like under his rulership, and it literally was like it said it was very dark, but it was very structured and organized. And so when I think of Saturn, like with fixed air and like just thinking of Aquarius, like how that makes up Aquarius, I think of like a very emotionally detached but structured leader. Like I think of um like like all of the words that come with Saturn, like restriction, order, discipline, responsibility. But then Saturn in air sign is different than what it would be in the earth sign of Capricorn, because for Capricorn it was a lot more tangible stuff. um and I feel like for Saturn and Aquarius, it's more like factual, like it's more about fact and structure regarding like thoughts, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense, or
Mm-hmm.
like just like on the intellectual level, whereas for Capricorn it was more the tangible stuff, like the earth realm. But for I think for Aquarius it's more ideas and concepts. So yeah, the structure
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah, no, that's like literally what I have too, like structures of thinking. Like
Yeah.
how do you think and how does that how can you instill limits and discipline and boundaries and endurance and how you think about things and your ideologies. One thing I wrote down was that so in the Cancer Capricorn episode, we talked about how Saturn is kind of bleak and kind of like depressing in a lot of ways, although there's other things to it. But because it deals with the reality, it can be kind of like, you know, harsh.
Yeah.
And so I think that Saturn still retains this characteristic in Aquarius, but I thought about the intellectual realm and how, as an air sign, because the mind is kind of limitless. Like, yes,
Right.
there's ways in which like you can limit yourself, but if you allow it to, if there like it can really do anything. Like it's not as like the material world is a little bit less, there's less room. It's limiting. I think the material world is limiting. There's only so much you can do with reality in the material world.
Yeah.
In your mind, there's like way less that you have limiting you. You can kind of go wherever you want to go. You can take it wherever you want to take it. Saturn, I feel like it gains its power. Like from Capricorn, it's like, okay, material limitations, how do I survive here, whatever, whatever. By the time it gets to Aquarius, it realizes that actually the only limitations that there are the limitations that I put on my mind. Like there's so which means there theoretically could be no limitations in that regard. And I saw this one tweet from an astrologer that was talking about how, at one level, reality seems linear. Very, it is what it is. This is Saturn and Capricorn, in my opinion. And I think I agree. Like, it is what it is. Like, your body is your body, your material realm is that. Um, and then they say on another, there is quantum mechanics, time slowing as something approaches the speed of light, and black holes. These are all areas in which time is like warped. Like time is not what you think it is. Like, so that is Saturn and Aquarius. So they're both realities, right? Like these are still like Aquarius is not saying it's not pie in the sky Pisces, like anything can happen. Like, no, like Aquarius is realizes like things have to be logical and structured and have, something that it's connecting back as a line of reasoning. But within the real logical structured world exists black holes, exists quantum mechanics, exists these things that are clearly telling us time is not what you always think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Saturn and Aquarius, like once it gets to the Aquarius, it's like, oh, actually, like there's so many realities. Like there's so many ways in which it is what it is, but it isn't always what it is. It could be a lot of things.
Yeah. I think that Saturn in Aquarius just challenges like what like already is certain. And it like it will always be open to, as long as it's factual, like you said. So like if it's like physics or like esotericism or whatever,
Mm.
esotericism, like
Hmm.
something that has like a science, like a science behind it, I think that like Aquarius would always be open to like learning about it or like developing their own kind of like opinions on that. Creation, like creativity and like our like own imagination, our minds, like they're boundless. So even though like this is a like sign that's ruled by Saturn, I feel like it's given that it is that air sign, that intellectual sign, like it also understands that there's like a lot more to learn within this
Hmm.
like planet or whatever within our time here.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's like the power that Saturn like is gaining. I mean, not to say Saturn in Aquarius is more powerful than Saturn in Capricorn, but I just think it's a little bit less restricted in the sense of like material restrictions. Yeah, so that is a little bit about Aquarius. And now we'll get into like just more in depth about our personal understandings of each signs individually. So we've already touched a little bit on what Leo means to us, but to come back to it, like what are some key phrases you have for Leo?
I have creative, passionate, loyal. I just wrote attention slash solitude. What I mean by that is that they need attention, like definitely, but they also, I feel like, do need um like their own autonomy at the same time. They need to know that they have their autonomy. Um, I think pride when I think of Leos. Um I think loving, caring, protective. Yeah, those are some words to think of.
Okay. I have centeredness. I said leading from the center. And I wrote that because I felt like in comparison to Aries, like I feel like Aries leads from the front, right? So the reason why I bring in Aries is because that is another place where the sun is doing well, right? The sun exalts in the sign of Aries. And I feel like Aries leads from the front and they don't look back, right? So they're leading from the front. And I think there's just a level of trusting that's just like, okay, you're going to follow, or if you don't, too bad for you, but whatever, I'm still leading. And I feel like Leo leads from the center in the sense that like they're more aware of what's going on around them. I think Leos do have an awareness of being observed, of being like the center. Like they know that they're at the center, which is why I think sometimes they can just feel like they have to be on because like the attention that they're getting, they know it. I don't think Aries always knows. I think there's a lack of awareness for Aries. I think they're just moving and kind of like they're getting the attention or like some people are following, but like they could care less if people weren't. I think Leo feels the responsibility to sort of lead from the center and to be what the people around them need them to be kind of. And I think that like at certain sort of it's kind of like a spectrum, right? Like at it can get into more shadow sort of sides when they don't really trust they're that they are the center and they feel like they need to do things to prove that they're the center versus just leading from the center and having an awareness of other people's perceptions but not letting it impact how you show up because you're just going to show up anyways. But I think just attention is important to the Leo archetype. And I feel like attention is one of those things that's like, it can feel really good, really affirming, but it can also feel really uncomfortable. It can feel very like, you know, pressure filled. Like there's so many things that come with attention.
Definitely. I feel like also like for them to be ruled by the sun that is the center. On the flip side of that, like without that like knowing, like a lack of purpose to them would be like a lack of direction for Sagittarius or like a
Yeah,
like in that same sense.
exactly. If you're a Leo sun in particular, your purpose is to be purposeful, right?
Right.
Like your purpose is to live from that core, to have that sense of self. So
Exactly.
if that is your purpose and you're having a hard time accessing that sense of self, then it probably feels really destabilizing because
Yeah.
it's like that is what you are here to do.
Right.
Another thing I had is that you can't get too close to the sun, but you need it. It kind of to me goes back to what you said of like that solitude that I think Leos do kind of like there is a sense of like distinctiveness. You can't be, for example, with a Leo, you can't just try to merge with the Leo and be the Leo, right? You have to let the Leo be the Leo,
Hmm.
and you need it to remind you that you are also the Leo. Like you are
Yeah.
also the center of your, like to me, it's very main character energy, right? And I
Like trying
recently,
to tame a lion.
right. My Leo exercise as I was preparing for this episode was like just thinking about my life solely through like my awareness of myself. And that's actually so hard to do. Like that was very hard for me to do
That is really hard.
because it's like, how could I only think about me in this moment? But like,
That's crazy. That's how they be living.
no, I don't think that's how they live, but I think that there is a understanding of like why that's important to allow you to really stay in your lane, focus on what you like, focus on yourself, like to not to just be
Be
the
your
main
own
character.
center.
Right, be your own center, be your own main character, like main character energy. It's not to say like there's no way that you can really operate in the world as a side character. You're always the main character of your
Of
life.
your
Even
life.
if it's not, that's not something that's like braggadocious to say. Like that is just what it is. I have to be the main character. I'm the only one who's in, like,
Your
who's
mind.
consciously aware of my experience. So, what would it mean to live my life knowing that I am the main character of
My
it?
Leo North Node, I'm like, wow, like this is what I'm here to learn. Like living your life. And I want to say living your life not concerned with perception, but I don't even feel like that's Leo. I think Leos definitely can be
Right. And I think that's what it means. That's when it comes back to like the attention. Like I feel like even Leos can have a hard time sort of using Leo energy. Like I remember I was in this workshop, this astrology workshop around using the energy of our rising signs or like what we feel like our rising sign ruler can help us to understand. And I remember for Leos, a Leo was saying like they feel like the sun can help them to understand how do they harness their light? How do they actually like make it useful in that way? And I feel like because the sun is like such a massive um like body in the sky, I feel like that is a lot of energy for a mere human to try to harness.
mere
Uh,
human soul.
yeah, like so I do think that oftentimes Leos struggle with how much sort of like power and awareness and consciousness and purpose that they know they're here to kind of bring about or like to express. But it's like it's a lot of it's a burden, just like how attention is a burden. Like attention can is like you can do a lot with attention. When all eyes are on you, you can do a lot, but you can also like lead people astray. You can also get afraid. You can get insecure about like
Hmm.
why is everybody looking to me in this moment? But it's like so it's like what do you do with all of this?
Yeah.
Like I think they know they're being perceived, and that's why it's
And
that's
sometimes it's empowering and sometimes it's not.
I mean, I think that it's like I think sometimes it's empowering, sometimes it's not, but ultimately it can't your light can't be about the perception. And I think that's
Right.
what a Leo has to try to like navigate. Like, yes, I'm being perceived, and those perceptions can't like impact my light. Like my light is going to shine whether nobody's there or whether everybody's there.
Yeah.
Most of the time, everybody's going to be there because you just know, like that's just like because you're the sun, like you're everybody's around, like there's
You're the sun.
you know that people are watching, but just because people are watching, you can't get out of your thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's hard not to because it's like when people are watching, now now instead of like answering to your own light, you're answering to other people's perceptions.
Yeah. It's like if you know you're like the most talented singer in all the land and you go like and you have a performance and then you have stage fright all of a sudden, like you can't like be concerned with how they're gonna perceive you because you're like you know you have that light and like if you are constantly concerned with how people are perceiving you, you might not like like showcase the talent that you do know you have. But
Exactly.
like if you can't, I mean, but if you like let these people simply watch, simply be bystanders, they can see like, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's like they can I think Leos too can lose sight of the fact that they're main character. I think
Yeah.
their biggest sort of challenge to main character energy is perception. Like is or allowing perception to mean something more to your light than what it should, right? Like as long like because it's like now you're the main character, but you're entertaining the side character. Like you're trying to move the way the side characters want you to move. And like
Mhm.
then you start to lose track of the main character. Like that's you're losing track of the task at hand. You're here to be the main character.
Yeah, I feel like thinking about Leos as like this flame, this fixed fire, like a bonfire or the sun or whatever, like they just do what they do and like they can't like it's like their end goal is literally to be this fire, to like fully embody this fire. And like obviously fire does not give a fuck about humans watching it or like whatever. But that like I feel like that is inherently difficult as a human being because we're literally like conditioned, especially like conditioned to adhere to our society.
And conditioned to reject ourselves in a lot of way. I mean, we've already talked about rejecting our bodies, but what about rejecting our own sort of like um our own fire?
Our
I
own.
mean, and I think some people are more conditioned to reject their fire than others. Fire on its own is like very powerful. We've already discussed, right? But when you think about a fire that knows it's fire, like think about like fire that knows that it's fire, that is a level of like power that now you can see why, you know, Leos kind of live across that spectrum of like super like scary, authoritative, like dictator, or like just super like inspiring, creative, like
Kind.
yeah, like all those things. Like you just have to be super because you are fire that knows you are fire. Like the consciousness. Like Aries, I think it does what it does, but I don't think Aries always knows that it's fire. Like I think that Aries, there's not as much of a like willful intent in terms of the energy. It just shows up. It just, but there's not really a like the consciousness that the sun brings in
Yeah.
for Leo that's like,
Like this is your purpose. This is who you are at your core. Whereas for like, I think, yeah, that's just like the ruling planets
yeah.
coming into like Mars versus the
Right.
sun.
Mars is just a little bit more embodied. It's more like instinctual, just like
Mhm.
just doing it. Whereas Leo brings it up to more of like a, okay, but like I'm in control of my life.
Yeah.
Like, um,
And like, I feel like knowing that, like having that power and knowing that makes you so like limitless and like, which is so funny, like in comparison to Aquarius, which is like literally like
mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, like if a Leo knows that they want to do something, there is nothing that will stop them from getting there. And that's like so inspiring to watch, like in a similar way to watching
Exactly.
fire. Like it's just like literally so I don't know. It's also like thinking of like a lion, what's like the symbol for Leo and like a lion like let's say hunting prey. Like apparently lions like hunt during a storm so they can't be seen or heard, like so that they could do
Mm.
like their best, like, like or like if they know what they want, they go after it and like they won't be stopped. And also a group of lions is called a pride of lions.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Um, yeah, pride. Let's get into pride.
okay, so like Leos and their pride, like what do you think, like where do you think their pride like see, okay. for me, I believe that Leo's pride stems from this idea that they are like ruled by their ego. And that's like goes back to what we were discussing about the ego and like its emotional reaction to things in order to protect themselves or protect their like ego. And I think that that's a lot of the way in which Leos move sometimes.
Personally, I don't think that. I think pride is another word that has negative things attached to it that like it's a word that's viewed more negatively in our like sort of lexicon, especially I think when it comes to um just like spaces where you're trying to be more Libran or like just trying to be more connected, being inclusive,
Yeah.
doing all these things, right? So I think that, and I think in those spaces, pride is seen very like you should not have, like, don't be prideful, like you shouldn't be prideful.
Yeah.
So it's not something you would quote unquote want to be. So therefore, I push myself to kind of think about pride if I didn't think about it as like this thing that's
It's
like
just like aware.
inherent, right? It's just, and that's what I think makes Leos like I think prideful gets attached to Leos often, and I can understand it, is because I think it is that awareness of your knowing. I mean, like it's the awareness of yourself, the self-awareness and the awareness of your light. Like if you realize that you are light, like you should be proud of that. Like that is something to be proud of because it's like your potential, it is your presence. And to be proud of one's presence is not inherently bad, I don't think. I think when pridefulness gets into a territory of causing harm, I think it's actually when it's like not rooted in the like inner knowing, and it's more so rooted in a protective like self-image protection. That's when I think pride has the potential to be harmful because I feel like it's not actually rooted in like that security, it's rooted in insecurity. Like
Right.
so if your pride is rooted in insecurity, then is it even real pride? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, because like what?
Yeah.
Because it's
No,
like
that's so, yeah.
I think some of the most negative ways that pridefulness shows up is through insecurity. So it's like by the time you like actually break down why someone who's prideful is being dismissive of other people or is like putting other people down, like ultimately it's because they don't actually feel secure in their light. And so therefore like to me, I think pridefulness when it's bad, it's actually not even real pride. It's just insecurity. Like I don't
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, no, I mean that's like such a like beautiful way to describe the word pride. And I feel like you said that in such a positive way that now I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like I do feel like that is like pride is like a great thing. Like, you know, like when you have pride in like your culture or like where you're from or like your sexuality or whatever, like obviously those are very like it's like seeing the light, seeing the goodness in those things.
hmm
Um, but on the flip side of that, like thinking of like pride as in like something that prohibits you from doing something that would make your life easier. I can see why you'd say it stems from insecurity, obviously. But like either way, like that is like a perception of the word pride, right? And so
Yeah.
like when we say like you have too much pride to like do this or whatever, like I think that that is like being so attached to like this sense, like this false sense of
Yeah,
identity.
the
Yeah,
image.
so like
I think it's being attached to the image of yourself, not
yeah,
the actual self, but the image that is portrayed. Because I feel like pridefulness, or like, for example, if you have too much pride to do something, I think that ultimately is about how it will look or
exactly.
like how other people would see it. It's not necessarily about what you need in the moment or like whatever. It's very much this idea of like thinking about yourself as someone that's being viewed.
Right. Yeah, and but I think that like while yes, like Leo's definitely can embody that like beautiful side of the word pride. Like I also think like I think that it comes to like security and insecurity within Leo's and I feel like within the axis really, but like the fact that like it's so evident if a Leo is not secure in themselves. Um, and like that's the thing about being like exposed the way that they are, being like
Hmm.
perceived the way that they are
Yeah.
constantly, is that like people will know how you're feeling. And I think it like makes them feel like they have to put on this like image because like they can deceive people into thinking that they are like this really secure person or this
Mm.
um like that they are certain of themselves or whatever, but like in those moments I feel like that's when they falter from that like image or
Right. It kind of makes me think about like just the shortcomings of certainty. And I think that's something that both Aquarius and Leo probably deal with. But like, what does it mean to be so certain that you are right and you won't entertain the idea of being wrong? Is it because that idea of being wrong will question the certainty? Like, I think there's an attachment to certainty.
yeah, I do think that. And I think that even in like beyond that, like there is an attachment to their beliefs or their like ideas or thoughts so much so that they literally will like go down with them. Like they're
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
what they believe to be true. Like they like if you threaten that like idea, like they already like naturally associate it with their core being, like with their self. And I think that's where like the being ruled by your ego and like your identity comes in, is like you're so close to those
Mm.
like thoughts and those beliefs and those ideas that like it threatens like your sense of self.
Because it's a fixed fire sign, right? It's like, it's not so much about being able to, like, oh, I'll just adapt a new belief or I'll adapt a new thing. It's like,
Right.
no, this is what it is. Like, I'm certain that this is who I am. So you
Yeah.
can't tell me anything that threatens that certainty because then that will require me to not be so certain. And I need to be
Yeah.
certain to
To know myself, to know my,
yeah,
I
right.
feel
To
like
know
it
who I
threatens their purpose. It threatens what they're here for. I don't
yeah.
know. Mhm.
Yeah, no, I think that's really relevant. I think that's about pride. Like that can show up as pridefulness. It can show up as like, I will not allow this conflicting information or this action that doesn't completely align with who I am to have any relevance in my life because this is not like, that's not who I am. I have too much
Right.
pride for that. But it's
Yeah.
like, what would it mean to, like, what if who you are is not who you actually are? That's
Yeah.
like crazy.
Exactly. What would it mean to like challenge that belief, or that like would that like destroy your sense of self
Yeah,
altogether?
right.
Like
Like, is your sense of self like dependent
an idea
on
or
idea, on a certain like sort of image or a
un
certain like, and how are you limiting yourself by not allowing yourself to be multiple selves? Like,
exactly. Yeah.
so
So that's on the shadow expressions.
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah,
One of many.
it can be, it can definitely show up as a shadow expression, but like more positively, it can show up as like confidence, as leadership. Um, it can show up as radiance, as like a self-awareness. And centeredness is my favorite word for Leo. Um, but then shadow, we said controlling. I also put self-aware. Like self-aware is like a superpower and it's a shadow because it's like if you're so self-aware that you're like you don't do things the way you would typically do it because you're aware that other people are watching you. Like that's a version of like self-awareness, but like there's also the self-awareness that's just like living in your purpose, walking in your purpose.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
also like you being the sun itself. Like how do you hide your shadow, or how do you have a shadow when you know, like are ruled by the sun, or like how do you have those things that bring you shame or that you want to
mm,
hide? Like it's like
yeah.
you can't, like you're constantly aware of those things probably.
Right, right. Wow.
Lost
Constant
to.
awareness. That's probably a huge thing.
That
That's
sounds
hard. And I
exhausting.
wrote self-critical, and I think it's
Oh yeah.
because of that consciously like constant awareness of oneself. You would have to
Mhm.
be able to see the bad, and whether you share it with the world that you see the bad, you see it. Like I
Yeah.
definitely think that's something they struggle with. Um, and then I have like domineering and like self-centered. Instead of just being centered, I feel like self-centered. It's I don't know, it's just like that reliant on like the image, maybe
Yeah,
self-image centered.
definitely.
When I was watching The Boys, I thought that Homelander could be a Leo. So Homelander is like objectively evil. Like he's just not a good person. And not to say that Leos are bad people. This is just Homelander. Homelander is a bad person. But I think he is a person that is very like aware of the fact that he's being perceived. And I think so much is shown. That's honestly kind of a weakness for him, because not a weakness, but it doesn't allow his evil to really go all out,
Hmm.
because he's still afraid of what people will think about him. Like he doesn't want people to know that he's evil. He wants everyone to still think that he's a superhero who like saves people and does good things, or just somebody that people's approval and their acceptance is still very important to him. And that comes back to him not feeling like he had that as a kid, and not, having parents and not having any real like relationships not based in fear, right? So like he still kind of needs that image of approval, and he wants his perception to be high. One thing they talk about throughout the show is like your points. Like, I don't know if you've
Hmm.
heard them mention that. And he's like always happy when his points are up. When his points are down, like it sends him into an identity crisis.
Hmm.
So obviously I think Homelander is like a shadow expression, I think, of Leo energy.
For example, on the episode I was at where like he believed that Starlight was a traitor. I won't like say anything more than that, but like how he came in and he like immediately instilled fear in everyone. Like I think that Leos can emit so much power that like it could be a beautiful, beautiful thing, but also like if they're scary, then that's like terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he was like everyone was immediately terrified. He literally like he was like very fixed on what he thought he was gonna do, whatever. The only way that like he was convinced otherwise was like literally through someone stroking his ego or something. Was
Mm-hmm.
like sounds about right. Like yeah.
Yeah.
But
So I'm sure, like, I think that Leo comes up a lot in like the typical story, right? Like there's usually a hero in a story, and I think the hero's journey is very like Leo.
yeah. I
Like
think like a Brooke Davis in One Tree Hill. You don't watch that show, but she was like the popular cheerleader. She was gorgeous. Like she was also like a little like bitchy. She like became a fashion designer. It follows like their whole life. So she becomes a fashion designer. Like she follows like her creative like pursuits, and she like started doing that at like 15 and literally like blew up and like had this huge line, and like that's very Leo-esque. And then also like I think like do you think like a Regina George? Because like that's more complex because like her character has its like she like flip flops, but I feel like she could have a Leo placement
mm.
from where she started at. But then she's like evil. But like, how come men can be evil? How come Homelander can be the evil one?
And so that's what I was gonna actually bring up, but I didn't know how to like bring it together. But I was thinking about, are certain traits of Leo more respected in like men
Oh
than
yeah,
women? And like the idea of a man doing like some of the like more, center of
like
attention,
arrogant or bossy or
right?
like
Like
words
those
that
kinds of,
would be.
right. I think those traits, when like demonstrated among men, is like seen as either more respectable or just more accepted, versus like for women or any other like gender that's not a man, like I feel like it's a little bit like it can come off as like, why are you wielding this power kind
Why
of.
are you taking up this much space? Because
Yeah.
like it's only acceptable for men to take up that much space in this place.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so let's move into Aquarius.
So what Aquarius represents? I think there's like the like the activist, like humanitarian type of Aquarius. Um, and then I think of like the like very sociable, like different, quirky kind of Aquarius, like the more respectable Aquarius versus like this like outcast, like the person that's like an outcast, they don't fit in. There's more thought that goes into the way in which that they are portraying themselves to the public. Thinking of like Paris Hilton, like her being an Aquarius, presenting the way that she does, she's very like calculative about her public persona. Like she like makes herself out to be this ditzy person and like just like like this like pop star like 2000s like whatever. And that's always been like the way that she portrays herself to the world. She's very like conscious of it. Like there's definitely a lot of intellect that is required to create this persona. But like Meg having like Tina Snow or like Paris Hilton having this like other like Paris Hilton. I feel like a lot of these um people kind of like have an outward public alter ego.
That makes sense. I think given the Saturnian nature, and then it's like, okay, you have a platform. One, I think having a platform for Aquariuses can be a little tough. Like that's the sun's detriment. Aquarius is not necessarily good at being like this sort of center of attention. That's not necessarily where they operate best from. And so I could see them trying to have a character that can be that center of attention because that's not naturally the space that they
Right.
be.
Yeah,
So they
maybe
might create a character for it.
they have such an influence, but like some of them are not that like public on a like outside of their careers, like they're
Mm-hmm.
very private about their lives or like whatever. Like when you think of like The Weeknd or like Ed Sheeran, like what does Ed Sheeran be doing? Or like um let's see, I have like a whole list on my phone. Jennifer Aniston.
Yeah, even I think Jennifer's a good example too. Like I just feel like they wear their celebrityness.
Like they're here to do what they want, what they gotta do, and then they're like, okay, the rest is mine. Like the rest is
Right.
mine.
Like they just kind of happen to be celebrities. Like
Yeah.
that's how I would think of an Aquarius
Aquarius
celebrity. Not
celebrity.
necessarily like they were here and that's what they felt like their purpose was to be a celebrity necessarily. Their purpose was to do what they want to do. And then all of a sudden they're a
They
celebrity,
blew
but
up
it's
for
like,
it.
but
Yeah.
it's not like they're like leaning into it. I think they're excellent observers of the human condition. If you think about where someone who's ruled by Saturn, where does Saturn exist within the solar system? Like the sun is in the center. Saturn is out and able to view everything that's going on with the inner planets. So when you can observe, like just by virtue of being on the outside at the limits of the solar system, you're seeing things from a much different perspective than when you're at the center of it. Like for one, you're not necessarily seeing things only from yourself. You're seeing things from like a systemic sort of what is everybody doing and what's going on throughout the
Right.
entire body. And I think another thing that I think about is Saturn and its associations with like being on the margins. And that's where like Aquarius gets this outcast sort of, archetype. And when you're on the margins of society, you know so much about everybody because you have to, like, not to, I mean, the only way I can think of it is like as a Black woman, right? Like in society, like I have to know more about white culture and
White
whiteness
supremacy.
overall for survival for to in order to make sure that the white people don't have to know anything about me. Like when you're at the margin, you kind of have to know everything about how everyone else works that's at the center in order to like continue to operate in the society.
Yeah.
So the perspective that Aquarius brings by having kind of that marginal perspective, by having like a little bit of a different, and different doesn't always mean progressive. I feel like that's something that kind of um gets kind of conveyed with Aquarius that I don't necessarily agree. Like I don't think every Aquarius is wants the best for humans. Like it's their idea of what they think is best, but it might not even be what's like
Hmm.
best from a socially acceptable way, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I do think there is a level of like difference. So if like if you're in a room full of like alt people, then the Aquarius might be the one who's not alt, like the normal person.
Yeah.
But like it's just in the context of where they're at. Like they're they
Yeah.
usually are like on the margin of wherever they're at.
They don't care about how they're perceived, and I think that in itself makes them an outcast. Like to
Right,
not
exactly. Or
really
they don't care to be accepted necessarily. That's not their goal.
exactly.
So what is their goal? I wrote down like they observe with the purpose of making mental and intellectual connections and networks that work for collective survival.
I
Mm-hmm.
think that they like really do want to like push what the norm is
Mm-hmm.
um within society. I think that that's like whether that be something small like in their everyday life or like on a larger scale for like activists or like humanitarians.
Right. I think
Just like change
they want
society.
to push what's accepted.
Yeah.
Like they want
Yeah.
to push like what is and like some things that are accepted could be good, some things might be bad, but like either way, I think they do tend to be contrarians. I think they value systems and structures and things rooted in like a logic or like reasoning, but it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's accepted by everybody. I think they're much more mental than physical. Um, and I think that when you think about the archetype of like friendliness, I think that comes from being able, again, to continue making these mental connections to understand like how we work as a collective. And like you need to understand a lot of different perspectives to kind of be able to build that sort of collective understanding of people. Like I feel like they like while Geminis might be gathering different perspectives just out of curiosity state, I think that Aquarians are like getting different perspectives to understand different ways of thinking. That's important for the collective because you can't just silo yourself intellectually. That's not very intellectual. Like you need to
You
have
can't
you have to have multiple sources.
because they're so factual and because they need, like you said, like to literally be explained things in a logical sense, like it can come off as like insensitive, desensitized, like whichever you want to use, on like a social level, on like like a relational level. Um, I think that if they don't like if your emotions are the only thing that you have to explain or to justify whatever it is that you're feeling, they will disregard it completely. Like that just doesn't matter to them. And
Yeah.
um, they won't like understand the value in it. I feel like Saturnians, they're like kind of like forced to be self-sufficient at such a young age. I think that for Aquarians, it's like kind of similar. And I think that when you when you experience forced self-sufficiency, it leads to emotional detachment. Like you can't really like have that same empathy or compassion when nobody was there to have that like for you. Um,
Yeah. Or just feeling like you have to grow up. So much around what it means to be strong is like to be emotionless or
yeah.
to like not be impacted by things that are hurting you. And I think that one thing I was like reading about, and it was like in regards to Saturnians in general, and how like Saturn has a lot to do with shame and how there can be like shame in being emotional. And like literally, I was listening to this one podcast. It was Conversations with the Zodiac. And during the interview, Kelsey was talking to someone who was saying like they used to cry alone because they were like ashamed to express that outwardly. Like that's what, and I feel like that's like a thing that I think, you know, a lot of people struggle with, but I think especially like earth placements. And I think that Saturnians, like there's just like this idea that like if you want to be stable, if you want to be just taken seriously, you can't have like emotions.
Yeah. That's really sad. And that's like when you were saying the thing about crying alone, like I definitely did that a lot when I was younger. And I'm like thinking, I'm like, but I'm like a Taurus moon. But then I'm like, I think that my Saturn is actually in my second house as well. So I
Mm.
don't know if that's like, hmm
So some other things that I had, um, I thought about abstraction for Aquarius. And I thought about it, and I think it works for both kind of meanings of the word. So like one meaning of
yeah,
abstraction means to literally like remove something from its like source. That's one definition of abstract, right? And I think that Aquarius being removed, like that's one way that it makes sense for me because I feel like they're more removed sign. They're not really a part of everyone. They're removed from everyone
and lots of
observing it.
different, yeah,
And
definitely.
then also, when you think of something as an abstraction, it's like something that exists in thought as an idea, but not physical. And so, abstraction to me is very much an Aquarian task to abstract things and to think about things in abstract. And I was just thinking about how, like, there's freedom in abstraction. Aquarians, for me, I think freedom is a word that's often used around Aquarius. And I think they find freedom through that removal, through that abstraction, because it's like, if I only look at it, and even like removing themselves from their emotions, like I feel like emotions kind of can feel like a not a prison, but limiting for Aquarius. Just viewing the emotional realm as one that will not provide clarity or like order. I think sometimes there's
Right. Given the power of emotions, like they can really throw you off of any structure or like stability or like any discipline or anything. Like in the mind of Aquarius, who is this like emotionally detached sign, I think that experiencing emotions fully could be like incapacitating. Is that
mm,
yeah, like
I feel like
um
they want to have there's a controlledness of their emotions. And even if you think about
right.
like they're not the water sign, but they are the water bearing sign. So it's like water bearing is not
Contained.
that's not really, yeah, it's contained. That's not doesn't have the potential to be overpowering to oneself. Like maybe you could overpower others, but it's not going to get really on you. You're more so
Yeah,
pouring the water over like the information and the stuff.
exactly.
Like the emotions are there. I feel like with Aquarius, when it comes to emotions, it has to be logical for them. But most times,
Yeah.
emotions aren't logical. And so that's where it gets like, that's where I feel like they can be emotionally detached because they're like, if they can't reason out the emotion, then they feel like it's not really even a valid emotion.
And I feel like you said, like if it's not logical, like I don't think that this is the case for like grief or like something like large that like
Right. Like that's like
has
a sensible emotion or like has a
right.
line of reasoning. But what about the feelings that you have that you can't really trace? Like, I feel this because this and this and that.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Like to them it's like, no, I don't feel it, I guess.
right. Yeah. It's like, well, can't,
If there's no source, there's no feeling.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that can be tough for them because it's like, that's not how feelings work. And sometimes, and most times, people aren't able to really spell out their feelings in such a conceptual way, which is how they are always thinking. Like feeling as a concept, like sadness as a concept, okay. But feeling sad without really understanding why you're
Yeah.
sad, like what? One quote that I had for Aquarius was in the book Parable of the Sower. And I thought it was important for like thinking about Aquarius's like orientedness around the collective and groups. Like I feel like they're the most sort of a sign that thinks the most about us as a collective, as a society, not just like another person, but like all the people.
Everyone. Yeah.
And so this is the quote. Civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals. It is a means of combining the intelligence of many to achieve ongoing group adaptation. Civilization, like intelligence, may serve well, serve adequately, or fail to serve its adaptive function. When civilization fails to serve, it must disintegrate unless it is acted upon by unifying internal or external forces. So I think there are a few things that made me think about Aquarius there. Just one, talking about groups and civilization. Again, civilization is a concept of like
Yeah,
what it would look like for a group to function efficiently.
right.
Um,
And
so I
also
think
comparing it to intelligence
in
is
the
more,
individual,
yeah,
right? And thinking about, and I thought this is a good segue into like Aquarius and Leo, because like intelligence is the thing that orders the individual, kind of. Like intelligence, meaning maybe like awareness or
right,
consciousness, that's what's
consciousness.
organizing the Leo, that's what's organizing every individual. But when it comes to group, it can't be about just intelligence. It has to be about this other thing, that's civilization, which is like the collective intelligence. And then it also says it's about achieving ongoing group adaptation. I think that's very Aquarian in the sense that's like, if this idea is not serving adaptation, if it's not serving like expansion of one's mind and continuing to like explore the limitlessness of your mental capacity, then it's not useful for them. I think of Aquarians as principled, right? I do think of them as having principles and like they have a determined way of thinking that orders their life. And so to have a determined way of thinking that orders their life, you cannot just be dissuaded or persuaded by just any old thing, right? It has to be rooted in that. At the same time, though, once it's past the bar of logic, once it seems like something that does make sense and it supports ongoing sort of collective advancement, then I think they will make room for it. It's like an interview, like they have phases. Like,
They
okay,
have, yeah, they have objectives that they have to meet.
yes, exactly. That part where it says when civilization fails to serve, it must disintegrate. I think that's like Aquarius when it's like
That
this
is Saturn.
right. Like we gotta this shit needs to be uprooted. We need to something new.
It
This
must
cannot be.
disintegrate.
Yes, it must disintegrate. And then it says, unless it is acted upon by unifying internal or external forces. And I think that's kind of the awareness that it either has to disintegrate or the collective will push it wherever direction it's supposed to go or
Right.
they want
And
it to
that's
go. But it
very
has to be a
Aquarius.
unifying collective. And if it's not unifying,
Yeah.
then it's going to fall the fuck apart. And I think that's what Aquarius knows. Like, there is power in the collective, kind of.
Yeah, definitely.
So that was Aquarius. And now I think we can get into the Leo Aquarius axis a little bit more. We've already been touching on both signs, obviously, but just thinking about the relationship that they have to each other and what are they sort of offering to the world and to the zodiac.
I feel like Leos teach others to see the like their purpose and their light and to like have pride in that light in the best of ways. Um I feel like it teaches like a certainty in the fact that it's all purposeful. Again, like I feel like they move with such purpose and such drive that like inspires others, and I think that like the way in which they inspire others, like I feel like it teaches us that like we have the capacity to move in a way that's ruled by the heart, like in a similar way, and to inspire others by our passion. I think that's something that Aquarius can learn from Leo is comfort in being seen and being perceived. And beyond that, I think that Aquarians can teach Leos that it's okay to not always need acceptance, I guess, to not, it's okay to like move through the world doing what you know you're certain of and have people disagree with you and to have people perceive you, like to have people like judge you or like whatever. I think that like for an uninvolved Leo, that's something that they struggle with is the security in their certainty within themselves. And for Aquarius, that's normal is to be like outcasted or to be perceived in a different way. And they're like okay with that.
They both have to do with individuality, like both Leo and Aquarius do, because I feel like Leo might be doing it more from a place of like acceptance or attention sort of seeking, but they're still distinct in how they're doing it. Like to be the center, you still have to be distinct. While you might be getting acceptance, there still is a distinction in the acceptance that you're getting. It might be more of like a just like more of a pedestal that you're being put on, kind of. And I think Aquarius, their individuality comes from like the opposite of that, like kind of like not being put on a pedestal and removing themselves from that from the pedestal altogether, but like and just not caring about it. And like maybe you're not necessarily like maybe you get the attention, maybe you don't, but because you've kind of been observing from this like outsider perspective, you've had to just be distinct. You're an individual by definition because you are separate, you're removed. But I think that where they kind of differentiate or where they can is like the like acceptance of self versus rejection of self. I think Aquarians can sometimes, even though there's a commitment to individuality, I think that that commitment is not quite as centered or self-serving. And so just not really placing the self at the center as often as they could be.
I think Aquarians are in this like forever state of feeling misunderstood and like they will never be understood, that they just kind of give up trying to explain themselves.
And I feel like Leo does the opposite of that. They're placing themselves at the center probably more than they should be and not thinking about how, like, yeah, you can be a centered self, but you also are functioning in a body of centered selves of people, like people with centered selves as well. And like that collective sort of heart, like how can a society function in a way like where people are all able to be individuals, but in service of a collective. And I think that Aquarians like the idea of like having individuality, but still having a respect and a regard for like the way things work on a human systemic level, kind of. So I watched this anime called Mob Psycho with my boyfriend, and we were on this episode. Well, for context, it's about this boy. He's in like, what grade is he in? I feel like he's in middle school. Um, but he could be in high school, middle or high school. And he is a psychic, like he has psychic powers. He can see ghosts, he can like exorcise ghosts, he can like move people, like all of the psychic powers, like just make people make things levitate, like throw like
Okay.
yeah.
I
So
feel like
think
the
about
ghost thing is like different then. It's
yeah,
like
well, when you think about psychic power, yeah, it also kind of surprised me just how like powerful his psychic
expansive
powers
it was.
were. But I did kind of realize like if you think again, the power of the psyche, like if you can master that, like you would be able to do some pretty like unexplainable things, like
Yeah.
being able to like move objects, being able to see things that aren't actually there, being able to so like those kind of like psychic powers. Anyways, and his personality is very, Aquarius. Like I feel like he's like very like emotionally removed. He doesn't necessarily have trouble making friends, but he is socially awkward. He's like just the type that kind of talks in kind of like a monotone nature, but he's still caring. Like he's like you can see like that he's a nice person. He just doesn't show up in a way that's like super emotionally present. But he's still like a friendly person. He's still like, just
Like he has a soul. There's feelings in there.
there's
But
feelings in there, but it's not like he's not very emotionally expressive like at
yeah,
all.
yeah.
However, because he's not very emotionally expressive throughout every episode there's like this ticking time bomb that basically is always running up, and when it gets to 100%, like they'll show it at different like in different areas of the screen, like and you can see it goes up as he's like getting more like frustrated or more like impacted by things, but he's still not letting it out. He's like, no, like this is not like, he's not going to let himself get to that level, because when he gets to 100%, he becomes like incredibly dangerous. And it's like his power, like he blacks out and like it's another version of him. And it's like chaos, destruction, like he can really hurt people. And he doesn't want to do that. So that's especially why he doesn't like to get to that level. But instead, he just like is emotionally unexpressive. So anyways, so there's this episode where he is fighting this other student who also has psychic powers. Now, this student goes to another school. And so the whole time, this student feels like he's tough shit. Like he feels like, I have psychic powers, nobody can face me. But then all of a sudden he meets Mob, like, or Shigeo, who is like the main character of the show. And he's like, oh my God, another person with psychic powers. Like, this is like a different experience for him. So this is what
are they nemesis?
Yeah, they're automatically nemesis because he feels like I cannot have another like if another person has psychic powers, I need to at least show that my powers are better. And so yeah, that's my Leo figure. And I hate to make it seem like Leos are so terrible, but I just think that, you know, this is sometimes the ways that it can show up. And not to even say that he's terrible, but just listen to the back and forth. So the guy who is the other student who thought he was the only one who had powers is Taruki. And Shigeo is the one that's the main character. Now, Shigeo does not use his powers on mortals. That's his ideology. He feels like he's not supposed to do it. His teacher told him he shouldn't do it, and he feels like he shouldn't do it because it would just be unfair.
Yes.
And so Taruki says, I'm popular and the main character of my story. This entire world and everything in it revolves around me. I'm the chosen one. I can control the destiny of everything around me. So right off that, Leo, right? And like he has psychic powers, so like I can see why he feels this way, but like this awareness and this like feeling of like, you know, I am the center of the universe.
Sense of purpose.
Yeah. And so Shigeo responds, I don't get it. How are you able to find all this confidence in yourself? So from there, you can kind of see like Shigeo has the same powers as him, if not maybe stronger, but like the confidence is not there. Like he doesn't think of himself as like this, like the center of the universe.
He doesn't have this like belief in himself. Like he doesn't
right, exactly. And he also doesn't want to hurt Taruki. Like Taruki keeps on trying to get him to use his psychic power. So like they're fighting at this point, and Taruki's like doing all this stuff, and he's like, use your powers on me. I need you to use your powers. Like he's mad because he feels like he's not getting a fair match because he's not using his powers. But Shigeo is like standing firm in his ideology. He's like, I don't want to hurt you. And because he knows that when he gets to that 100% level, he can like black out. So he's like, I don't want to hurt you. And he said, just because you're able to use psychic powers doesn't mean you're any better than anyone else. Which I think Aquarius can kind of feel like I think they put themselves on a pedestal in some ways in terms of ideology, but I don't think that they feel like they are inherently more worthy than another person.
Yeah.
Like they very much view things on like a level playing field. Like it's not like a hierarchy necessarily. If anything, they view things just more from a removed perspective so they can see everything, but they're not like, oh, I'm better than you.
Yeah. Like, even though they might have the same skills, like they're not like, they're more so like righteous. Is that what you're saying? Like they're like on the ideology level, they're a little bit more righteous, but they don't believe themselves to be better than anyone.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
And then after a while, Shigeo says, like, he has this realization. He's like, oh, I get it now. You and I are the same. You have no confidence in yourself the same way that I don't. If you take away your abilities, there will be nothing left. You'll be empty. You're scared of that realization. No friends, no standing out, just another loser who won't leave a mark in this world. So I was like,
I'm gonna cry. Why do you read it for filth like that? That's hilarious.
Read him for filth. And that is the thing, because Aquarians like do that thing where they're like observe, they're like, oh, like,
They can read you for filth and they will hurt your feelings.
and it's wild because he's saying this with no emotion still. He's
And
like, oh,
it's like everything he's saying is true. It shouldn't be as like but like it is really hurtful.
literally.
Like I was hurt.
And listen to Taruki's response. He's like, you're the only person who can make that argument. That's why your very existence pisses me off. Like you're the only one who could argue to me that
I don't have confidence.
right, that I don't have confidence, or that like if we take away my abilities, there will be nothing left. Only you can make that argument because
you have the same ability. It's giving like the axis. Like only you can call me out because you are me. Like you have my
yeah,
powers.
exactly.
Like you're the only person that can tell me that. Like a
Right.
human being that doesn't have the same like capacity, like or the same powers, like couldn't call me out on this because it would mean nothing to me. But like for
Right.
you, it hurts a little extra.
Exactly.
You see
Exactly.
me.
Yes, yes. You see exactly. You see the real me. And because you see that real, like the insecurity and the fear that I actually have within, like I need to destroy you.
Yeah, you're the only person that can harm me, so I gotta kill you.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
literally.
That was
Um,
good. That was a good,
yeah.
yeah.
And then finally, like literally Taruki does so much to Shigeo, like literally chokes him out and he's like unconscious because he's like so
Is his time bomb going up as this
yes, his
goes?
time bomb keeps on going up and up. He keeps on saying, I'm not going to hurt you. I don't. And he literally is like getting his ass beat. He's just like,
What
and
is
then
he, Jesus?
literally, but then after he's like unconscious, and then like there's like a moment of like nothingness that seems like he's defeated. Then all of a sudden, boom, it's at 100%, and he like blows up the whole building, blows the guy away. He's in the sky. Taruki's in the sky, right? And he's like, okay, like you've proven your point. I won't use my psychic powers against other people. And he says, oh, I guess I'm just an average person after all. But he's like, there's like a freedom in how like he like realized.
Wait, remind me. So the person says, I guess I won't use my psychic powers. That's the Leo.
Yeah, he's like, I won't use my psychic powers against other people. Oh, I guess I'm just an average person after all. That's the Leo. So at first he was like using his psychic powers on anyone just to, just because he could.
Right.
But now, like that he's been shown this lesson, I guess, he's like realized that he shouldn't just use it on average people, and that like he shouldn't abuse his power, and that he's also just another average person. If averagely everybody has the light in them, like you know what I'm saying, like to be an
So then
average
you
person
are average.
is to be someone who has a purpose, right? Everybody has the purpose. Leo is aware that they have the purpose. And so but once you realize that everybody actually has a purpose, then it's like you can still be distinct, but you're not distinct in being purpose, like being given a purpose.
Your light itself is the distinction, but
Having a
your
light is not.
having a light is not the, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So your light is a distinction, but having a light is not, because you might think you're the only one that has the light. You might think you're the only one that has psychic powers, but someone who else could have psychic powers too. And if you are only relying
Your
on
sense of identity.
right, exactly. If your sense of identity is on having psychic powers or having a light, then it's and other people not having it, then it's always going to be like fragile, because
Right.
that's not what makes you different. Everybody has the light.
Mm.
Um,
I love that as an example for the axis itself.
yeah, I think that was like definitely both of them. There's another part, but I think I'm not going to mention it because it's just extra. But
No, I'm kind of like invested in the story.
you're
Like
invested? Okay, okay. Because I've been
that's the next part.
um so Shigeo does like, so he's just obliterated everything, right? And he wakes up and he's just like, at this point it's like his best expression of sadness, I guess, because he did not want to do that. Like he told himself he was not going to let himself get to that level anymore.
Right.
And so the narrator starts to say this like soliloquy, I guess, where he's like, Shigeo failed to change as he had promised himself. So that's just referring to the fact that like he didn't want to do this and he still did it anyways.
Right.
And it was like he didn't know where to direct his emotions. And his powerlessness was born from overwhelming contradictions and the feeling he would never be able to conquer himself, which is sadness. Um, and so what had just occurred was Mob's meager attempt at resisting his inner self. And I think that I really liked that quote because it just made me think about how when Aquarians don't feel their emotions, when they don't allow themselves to have emotional experiences, how it can like be a way of them trying to resist their inner like humanness, like their inner sort of instincts or the inner, emotions are natural. So for you to try to like keep them at bay, even if it's for the collective or even if it's for whatever ideology you have, like that ultimately can be more harmful. And it's like a way of resisting your inner self.
Yeah. I feel like another lesson that Aquarius can learn from Leo is like, despite the fact that you might feel like you're not going to be understood, like expression, like is something like I feel like that comes so naturally to Leo, like
Mm-hmm.
expressing yourself or learning to express yourself, despite the fear of rejection or the fear of like not being understood, is necessary for like your own well-being. And you're not a robot. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to like feel those feelings and to express them and to like have needs and to not feel like you have to provide, you're the only person that can provide for yourself or that can like meet those needs.
So yeah, as far as like what these two signs might have to offer us, like as a
As a
society,
society,
yeah,
as a collective.
as a collective, yeah. I think they both offer like a sense, like perspective. I think perspective is something they both offer. Like obviously they're offering different perspectives, but I think they're both perspectives that are important to consider, right? When you're thinking about something, it's important to have your own sort of um, understanding of it as you see it from your centered position as the main character of your story. What is your experience of this? Like, if you don't have that, I think it can be very just difficult to know who you are. And also, it's important to be able to see things from an outsider's perspective or from the perspective of like someone who doesn't necessarily have all eyes on you, but like who is still like because you don't have all eyes on you, you can see, the entire sort of board, right? Like when you're playing chess or something. I don't play chess, so I don't know if this is valid, but I assume you have to be able to see the whole board and really like
Yeah.
look at like how are things moving collectively, how are things bumping into things and making, so having that perspective as well in order to understand the value of the collective and being a part
Mhm.
of something larger and being like just knowing like multiple brains are more powerful kind of than one.
Yeah. And they both teach that like your purpose is an individual thing. However, like you can also contribute that on a larger scale
Mm-hmm.
and you can inspire people on a personal and large scale, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they both do that in such beautiful ways, but differently. Um, and that it's okay to not always be understood and that um, it's okay to not always be accepted. That doesn't dim your light at all.
Mm-hmm.
If
Yeah.
uh, you're not. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I feel like, I don't know, one thing that came up for me that I think they both kind of remind me of, and I don't know how this is going to sound out loud, but it's like you're special and you're not. And that's like
Yeah.
okay. Like, like you are special. Like, yes, your light is distinct, like we said, but like you're also not in the
But
sense
we're
that,
all special.
right, like we're
So
all
that makes
special.
you
So
less
you,
special.
right. And it's like, but what does it mean to still like to be okay with that and to still find confidence and purpose and your light and like honor that and also honor the existence of that on a collective level, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the reality that Aquarius kind of sits with as a child of Saturn, right? Like
Right.
they know that, yeah, they're outsiders, they're outcasts, they're distinct. And they also know that, you know, it's not just about them. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like you're the main character of your story, yes, always. And I think that's what Leo reminds Aquarius and reminds all of us. And I love that lesson from Leo. And then Aquarius reminds all of us that like your individuality cannot be threatened by everyone else's individuality. The presence of everyone else's light is not
The absence of your own.
mm, thank you.
Mm.
So yeah, that's what I think they're both kind of reminding us. And yeah, I encourage everyone. The Leo activity for me was really fun. I don't know. It just made me think about things from a completely different perspective. I think especially as a Libra moon, and I think a lot of my thoughts are very other oriented, or like, what is everyone else thinking? What is everyone else going through? And
Mm.
that, but like I like changed my perspective and I was like, okay, let me just put me in the center. Like, what if I just always just consult me?
Yeah. That's so like I love that for you. I feel like that's definitely a lesson that I need to work on. Um, that sounds a lot easier said than done though.
It
Not to
definitely is. And I feel like I definitely was like, I had to be intentional about it. Like, it was
No,
not
but
like
like if you, my Libra moon best friend, were able to do it, I know I can.
you definitely can. Aquarius things that I think would be fun to get into the Aquarius energy is to like just allow yourself to show up in a way that doesn't really care about how people are going to view you because ultimately you're always going to be different. Like we're all
Mhm.
different and we're all the same.
Period. We're all different and we're all the same. That's the name of our episode.
Not to make it more confusing, but
All right, well, on that note, I think we will close out this beautiful Leo Aquarius episode. We were very excited to record this, and we can't wait to see y'all again for our Virgo Pisces episode that's next. And with that one, we'll be closing out our season. So we hope you guys
yeah.
have enjoyed the journey as much as we have.
Yeah, I definitely am excited to do Virgo Pisces, you know, Pisces rising. We said it every episode, so I'm very, you know, curious to hear our long conversation on Pisces and
I
Virgo.
can't
We love
wait.
Virgo too. Yeah, so bye everyone. Have a good rest of your day, week, whatever it is you're enjoying.